Works best when it's balanced here in the middle.
John Kasich, always good to see you. Thanks very much. That does it for today. I'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report starts right now.
Welcome to a special edition of the Daily Report this Wednesday, April 9th. I'm Lindsay Reiser. A 90-day reprieve. President Trump reverses course and sets reciprocal tariffs at 10% across the board, effective immediately, with the exception of China. Why the president is escalating its trade war with Beijing.
We have a big job to do. No other president would have done what I did.
As I've said in the past, no one creates leverage for himself like President Trump.
China continues to retaliate. Other countries didn't retaliate.
When you punch at the United States of America, President Trump is going to punch back harder.
Stocks surged the moment President Trump announced a 90-day pause to the reciprocal tariffs placed on dozens of countries.
The Dow Jones rose about 3,000 points, closing close to 8% up. The Nasdaq spiked roughly 1,800 points, about 12%. S&P 500 jumped around 470 points, about 9%.
Donald Trump is feeling the heat from Democrats and across America about how bad these tariffs are. This is doing such damage to people's pocketbooks.
As I talk to my farmers, there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of uncertainty, because when we get into a trade war, usually the first pawn in the trade war is agriculture.
It does feel like it's going to short-term drive a lot of the prices up, and we're going to go back to those really expensive grocery store items.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. Since the Trump administration announced sweeping new tariffs, there's been mixed messaging from the White House. And we know our viewers have questions about what everything means for them, whether it's your 401k, mortgages, or the cost of everyday items. We wanted to provide some clarity on things you may be confused about when it comes to the Trump administration's tariff policy. So we have asked you to send in your questions, and tonight, our Money Watch experts are here to help answer. CBS News business analyst Jill Schlesinger and Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady here with me on set all night. We're not letting you go anywhere. You've got coffee.
I do.
What do you have?
I got a little tea.
All right, we got tea. We got caffeine. We're good. We're in it for the long haul, right? So we're going to begin with a major shift in President Trump's tariff policies. The president announced Wednesday that higher levies on the vast majority of America's trading partners will be put on pause for 90 days. So during that time, the U.S. will lower the universal rate to 10% on those foreign nations, with the exception of China. President Trump says the U.S. will raise tariffs on Chinese goods to 125%, effective immediately. This is in retaliation to China saying it would raise tariffs on U.S. goods to 84% starting Thursday. At the White House Wednesday, President Trump was asked what led to his decision.
Well, I thought that people were jumping a little bit out of line. They were getting yippy, you know. They were getting a little bit yippy, a little bit afraid. No other president would have done what I did. No other president. I know the presidents. They wouldn't have done it.
CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang joins us now. So, Weijia, you just spoke with Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. What did he tell you?
Well, we were trying to get a sense, Lindsay, of exactly what changed between, just 2 days ago when the president was directly asked whether he was considering postponing or pausing these tariffs. And he said, no, that's not on my mind. And today, when obviously we saw this pulling back, and we tried to ask if that had something to do with the markets, in particular the bond markets. And I'm sure Jill and Kelly are going to explain much more eloquently than me. And, Lutnick explained that, it was because the sheer volume of calls from more than 75 countries who were clamoring to get a trade deal. But, Lindsay, I pointed out that those calls started pouring in the day right after Trump made this announcement last week. And so I tried to press Lutnick about exactly what changed, if he could add more details. Take a listen.
What changed in the last 24, 48 hours, if it wasn't the market?
Well, remember, people calling and saying, I'd like to talk, but offering the same old was not going to move the needle. What happened is the prime minister started calling their heads of trade, and they started making offers that were the right kind of offers, the right kind of thinking, the right way of addressing how things are going to change. And it became very, very clear that we can get there.
But it's notable, Lindsay, that the administration has not announced any concessions from any country, but they are obviously expressing optimism that that will happen ultimately. Should also point out that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said that this was always the plan.
No, we have been getting viewer questions. We're going to be asking our experts. You are one of those experts, so I want to pose a viewer question to you. And this person asks, are these massive tariffs meant to either pressure other nations into more favorable trade deals in the eyes of this administration, or is it meant to pressure American businesses to do more domestic manufacturing, or both? Wejo, what say you?
I think President Trump has made pretty clear that for his grand vision of a new era for Americans' manufacturing sector, for the American economy, it really is a mix of both. And so he wants there to be these trade deals, which does add more pressure to American companies to boost their manufacturing, because even though these tariffs are not the high reciprocal rates that he first announced, they are still there. They are still at 10% across the board. And so, for some companies, that is quite significant. So the president's hope is that they will rely less on foreign imports and start, boosting their own manufacturing. His hope is that companies will move here, move more employees here. Of course, time will tell, because there's a lot of other factors that have to be considered when big companies are making decisions like that.
Weijia Jiang, thank you so much. Let's go ahead and take a look at how the markets were reacting to this announcement today. We've all been on the roller coaster and seen the market's behavior. So the Dow today closed up almost 8%. The tech-heavy NASDAQ up more than 12%. S&P 500 up 9.5%. And we've been talking about this today, Kelly, not enough to make up for the losses that we've seen over the last week.
No, but if you were watching the Dow, immediately when this announcement came up, there was a big spike of green, and it was the single biggest day that we have had for a rally since 2020. They mentioned the 10%, Jill. Imagine if we had had no tariffs, the 10% would have been pretty significant. This was more like, oh, thank God it's not as bad as it was.
Yeah, such a relief to know something that is not so extreme. Coming into this period, when we were getting ready for this Rose Garden announcement, most of the analysts and strategists and economists, they had kind of penciled in this 10%. They knew the autos would be a little more. They were surprised about that Canada and Mexico were first. But I think that the sentiment was, we're getting 10%. And if that had been announced, if this deal that's right now, the pause deal, were announced on that day, I think we would have gotten actually a relief rally to have the news out. And if it were not a pause, but an actual, this is what the level is, and we'll see where we go next, I do think that the markets would have reacted pretty well to that. It's very difficult to imagine that you put the entire world through this whole process over the course of 5 or 6 days, perhaps unnecessarily.
Well, or really causing a lot of loss among people's portfolios. Somebody was telling me today that he might have to work, he's closer to retirement, might have to work an extra year as a result.
Maybe 6 months after today.
Maybe 6 months. That's why you're here, Jill, because you do the numbers. But to both of your points, 10%, not nothing. 125% tariff on China, not nothing. So, Kelly, what does this look like with this tit for tat between the U.S. and China? How does this end?
Yeah, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, I declare a trade war, right? Look, this is going to mean potentially higher prices for Americans and Chinese citizens, right? Also potentially slowing growth if people just say, hey, I'm going to not spend as much because a lot of what we buy is from China. And retaliation. In the opening, it talked about farmers being the first to get hit. They saw this under the first Trump administration and how devastating it can be. They did get an aid package, but that's something to think about. What I'm wondering, though, is if these deals happen and the negotiations happen and it becomes the U.S. and the world against China, their economy is in a tough spot. Does that become a problem for them?
Well, I think they're in a tough spot, but you see that they've been courting some of their former enemies. And I think that's been fascinating.
Give us some examples.
We're going to sit down and have a discussion with Korea. And I thought that that was just a shocking moment where you could see the Chinese saying, listen, he's going to be tough on you. President Trump's going to be tough on you. We're here for you. India, I know you're friends with Trump, but we got a lot of stuff here. We'll bring cars to you. Don't worry about it. I think there's a real risk when you're creating these kinds of massive tariffs and policy shifts. There's a risk that you push your friends into the arms of your enemy. And that's the thing that I think that we have to keep an eye on. You know, it's not that long ago where Germany was buying a lot of energy from Russia. And that all had to get undone very quickly with the war in Ukraine. I think that there are people who are watching this geopolitically and economically and seeing, where are the chips going to fall here? We're not sure.
We're going to continue to pull on that thread throughout this hour, but I do want to get to another viewer question. Why is it okay for other countries to charge tariffs, but not okay for the U.S. to do the same? The president's been saying the global trade right now is completely unfair. He's trying to level the playing field.
Oh, I mean, look, there is something to be said if there is an unfair playing field on certain products. And I think that we would feel a little bit more secure in the idea of we're leveling the playing field if we didn't have such a blunt on a piece of cardboard rollout of a plan. If they said, look, what we did is, and I understand this is what they did, that there were a lot of economists that went from the government and went and talked to companies and said, where's the pressure point? How can you sell through? Where are you feeling the pain? And then you come up with a more nuanced, like you take your scalpel out. You don't take this hatchet to the entire trade regime that's been working, not perfectly, but pretty well for 80 years or so.
You know, I just want to pick up on that because, look, it is okay. It is okay for the U.S. to charge tariffs. You know, it's really the difference between a protectionist versus a global mindset. I think where I've heard a lot of economists and analysts push back and say, Canada, Mexico, I mean, come on, we've got a trade agreement with them. They're so important.
And one that Trump negotiated.
Exactly, in his first term. But, you know, some of these countries that do keep out American businesses, like, yeah, let's try and level the trading platform here.
So another question that we have is, how do these tariffs impact everyday consumers, especially when it comes to something we've all seen, prices at the grocery store or the hardware store? What's the long-term outlook? Are these tariffs likely to strengthen the U.S. economy or just cause temporary disruption? Maybe part of me feels like that last latter, as time will tell. But
yeah, and also it depends what the tariffs are, how long they stay in place. Where you're going to see the first price increases is with perishables, right? So just think of it this way. There's a bunch of stuff that's on the racks of stores all over the United States. A lot of that stuff has been imported. And once that stuff is sold, we're going to have to see whether these companies are going to restock their shelves. When they restock their shelves, what's going to happen? There's going to be a tariff due, and Walmart might say, okay, we're going to import that. We're going to bring that on our shelves, and now we're going to pass along that price increase to you, the consumer. The longer tail of the effect of the price increases would be with places that have a lot of inventory. So if people go out and buy a ton of cars in the next 3 months and they run out of inventory fast, then you're going to see prices go up pretty dramatically for cars. And I think that in all of these little areas, it is going to be an inventory. And I think that I'm pretty sure when you reported on this, that there was a real inventory buildup in the first quarter in anticipation of these
vehicles
tariffs.
Particularly?
Yeah, and actually, though, with vehicles, we just did a story the other day. So many people have already come in that inventory has gone down. Two things that I'll add
Are people
to
saying,
that.
let me get in before these
Yes,
tariffs? Okay.
exactly. Two things I want to add to that is, one, just at home, if you are expecting a price increase, do the math. It shouldn't be off of the sticker price, okay? Because the tariff is charged on the import price. So I don't want anyone going to the car dealership and saying, oh, my $60,000 car should cost 25% more. That makes sense. Just do that math and negotiate with them because they shouldn't be charging you 25% more off the sticker price because that's not what they're paying.
It's sort of fascinating when you consider what was created after COVID, right? We had such a massive supply chain disruption. It was awful. Remember the ships being stuck and we couldn't get the stuff we needed. And I think a lot of companies were trying to diversify their risk when it came to the supply chain. The supply chain actually got longer from what it used to be. It really did. It started to move in a different way.
Meaning touching more hands.
Yes. And every time it touches hands, think about it. Like, let's say we're putting together a GM car in the United States. The parts that create that car may go back and forth across the U.S., Canada, Mexico border up to 8 times.
Wow.
8 different times you're going to pay a tariff. So to your point, Kelly, I think that idea that, like, wow, we're punishing our partners. And frankly, if he had come out and said, you know what, I love that deal, that was a great deal, and he and Claudia Sheinbaum had a little, like, side conversation, like, you got to help me with the immigration problem, I think people would have been okay.
Yeah.
I just think starting with Canada and Mexico is really a shocking moment for most people who are watching this.
Well, some people at home might be wondering, could tariffs be good for secondhand retailers? Well, the president and CEO of online marketplace Poshmark joins us next to discuss how he thinks this could impact their business and their customers. You're watching a special edition of the Daily Report.
I think I asked direct questions. I don't know that they're tough questions per se. When do consumers actually get to touch and feel a difference in their lives? So you would encourage Democrats to work with Donald Trump on an issue like healthcare. That's the role of Face the Nation, to focus on the issues at hand. That means a civil conversation with perspective.
Sunday morning, Wicked Oscar nominee Cynthia Erivo. A few words from Flo, plus 100 years of The New Yorker. Listen for the trumpet.
It was almost like being face to face with the devil.
Women riding bicycles dismembered.
She just vanished.
48 hours reports.
I fought and fought.
911, what is your emergency?
She disappeared off the face of the earth. Ever think in your wildest dreams someone might want to kill you?
This almost became a game of psychological warfare.
You're caught. You're gonna go down.
Stream 48 hours, 24/7. CBS Sunday night.
Here we go.
The ultimate tradition continues.
From what I've seen, it's like chaos.
America's longest running news magazine show is back.
For 60 minutes!
60 minutes.
With a new season.
Hey, let's go.
You're willing to talk about anything. I'm open to all of it. Ask me the hard-hitting questions. So how do you get over the nerves?
Honestly, it's a whole bunch of mind
The most influential people.
Who's the best coach in college football? Let me see a mirror so I can look at it.
Are you a billionaire yet?
None of your business, man. You trying to get me robbed?
Investigative journalism.
Am I getting a real look at what life is like in here today? Absolutely not.
Do you think people visiting know that these were looted?
When stories threaten our way of life, 60 Minutes demands answers.
This is the pager that Hezbollah was using.
Do you have hope that you may find him yet? They were asking me to do something that was illegal.
They're fighting for faulty parts?
Yeah.
What is the most important takeaway for our audience?
How big of a problem is doping?
Where was the military?
Why are people suspicious?
That sounds like a problem.
How is this possible?
Oh, come on.
Come on.
Whoa.
Wow.
What is going on?
I'm Scott Pelley.
I'm John Worth.
I'm Leslie Stahl.
I'm Bill Whitaker.
I'm Sharon Alfonsi.
I'm Cecilia Vega.
I'm Anderson Cooper.
This is 60 Minutes.
The CBS News original.
Showtime, baby.
It's time for 60 Minutes Sunday on CBS. Don't miss a minute. Now streaming. What happens when you get conversation over conflict?
I think they've taught me to have grace and compassion.
When we follow the human side of the headline.
I'm not asking that we ignore disability, rather that we do not ignore ability.
When news takes you where the story happens.
We've just crossed into Lebanon.
When the world's best journalists come together to cover your world, you get the all-new CBS Evening News every weeknight.
The tariff announcements and policy updates out of the White House have been changing rapidly, so we wanted to give you an overview of everything that's happened since January 20th. CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady has more on this. Kelly, what you got?
I got a roller coaster for you, Lindsay, okay? So I just want to take you through all this because just hours after he was sworn in, President Trump announced a plan to tariff Canadian and Mexico goods by 25% for not stopping migrants and fentanyl from coming across the U.S. border. Now, days later, he signed an executive order setting those tariffs in motion, along with a blanket 10% tariffs on Chinese imports. Remember that. We're coming back to that. But just before those Canada and Mexico tariffs were supposed to go into effect, the president pressed pause for 30 days because both countries promised steps to address Trump's border concerns. The China tariffs, though, they still started on March 4th. Now, let's go to the next one. The following week, Trump issued proclamations declaring a 25% tariff on aluminum and steel imports would begin in March. Fast forward to March 4th, when the delayed tariffs against Canada and Mexico went into effect, and then Trump increased levies against China to 20%. Remember, we're going from 10 to 20 there. In response, China and Canada imposed 25% tariffs on $155 billion worth of imported U.S. goods, such as orange juice. Now, the backlash from the Canada and Mexico tariffs going into effect was followed by the White House modifying a few details. So it delayed tariffs on imported cars from Canada and Mexico by a month. It also exempted some Canadian and Mexican imports that comply with the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreements. That's what we just talked about in the last block, all right? So then, on March 12th, in response to steel and aluminum tariffs going into effect, the EU and Canada announced billions of dollars worth of retaliatory tariffs targeting everything from computers to bourbon, like key exports from the U.S. The next tariff from the Trump administration came on March 24th with a 25% tariff on all countries that buy Venezuelan oil. And 2 days later, Trump formally announced a 25% tariff on all vehicles and auto parts shipped to the United States. Then that takes us, live TV, there we go, finally came up. Then that takes us the last few days. All right, President Trump introduces widespread reciprocal tariffs as high as 34% on about 90 countries and even some uninhabited islands. China responds to that with its own 34% tariff on U.S. imports. Tuesday, White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt confirmed the U.S. would add an additional 50% tariff to China, bringing the total tariffs on Chinese imports to 104%. And Wednesday, China announced it was raising its tariff rate on U.S. imports to 84%. And then the EU approved tariffs on over $20 billion worth of U.S. goods. That brings us to right now. If you are still on this roller coaster with me, the U.S. announced a 125% tariff on China and is reducing those reciprocal tariffs down to 10% for 90 days. Lindsay, are you dizzy yet?
It's been a journey. Kelly, thank you. One of the biggest beneficiaries of these reciprocal tariffs may actually be the U.S. resale market. So that's according to a new report from Vogue Business. The reasoning is industries like fashion may see higher prices as companies pay more to bring in imported products. So consumers may look instead toward secondhand sellers to get better bang for their buck, buying stuff that's already here. Manish Chandra joins us now. He's the founder and CEO of social marketplace Poshmark. Manish, I bought and sold a lot on your site. Thanks for being here. Is that your read of the situation, that secondhand sites like yours could stand to benefit from the current climate?
Well, secondhand is here to stay. And when we think of secondhand, the products are already here in the United States. They're sitting in your closet, so they are already ready and available, and they are high quality. So we do think that resale offers a real meaningful alternative to buying from retail. And perhaps tariffs could accelerate the adoption of resale across the country.
Well, Poshmark also operates in Canada, Australia, and India. So how could your overseas businesses be affected by all this?
Well, each of our countries is domestic. So Canadians buy from Canadians, U.S. buy from U.S. So they're really, our business is kind of independent of the imports that are happening in the country. So even if you buy a product that was originally made abroad, today you're buying it from another seller in U.S. And that's really powerful to think about, because you're taking a dollar. First of all, you're saving it because these things are typically much cheaper. Second, you're saving the environment. Third is you're putting the money in the pocket of somebody else who is selling from their closet. So we think of resale, particularly fashion resale, as something that's both great for the economy, great for the environment, and great for society.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an interesting point, because, you know, if I'm not going to go shop in my own closet, maybe I can save a little money by going to you. I do want to ask you, though, because home goods is, I think, another one that people will purchase on your site. Would President Trump's tariffs make these products more expensive as well?
Well, I think tariff picture, as you just pointed out, is changing. So it's a constantly evolving picture. But I do think that the broader implication of buying from each other is really conserving trillions of dollars of goods that we've already purchased that are sitting in our country, sitting in our closet, sitting in our home. And by transacting them, we are, first of all, living in a more sustainable future. But second of all, the kind of products that you can buy are very contemporary, very trendy. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Right now, things that are hot and trendy on Poshmark are very much of what is happening. So for example, products related to Masters Golf are up 62% last week. Products related to platform sandals are up 132%. Related to Coachella, which is coming up and actually happening. So when we start to think of these things, you can actually find items, you can build your closet from multiple items, and then maybe add 1 or 2 new items to kind of spruce it up.
Well, I see how you would be seeing a big influx of sellers if things slowed down. But let's say that the economy slowed to a real crawl. Where are the buyers going to come from?
Well, I think the great thing about selling from your closet is that every person in America has a closet. And what you can do is first, by selling something, you can make room and then buy something. So what we saw at the beginning of COVID was first people started to list a lot of items, and then as their closet started to move, you had this buy-sell sort of cycle that's happening. And even today, even when I see something that gets sold, it's so easy to just turn around and use those proceeds for something to buy. So that circular part of the economy, I think, can be very helpful if the customers and consumers' wallet is under pressure, which it could be in the future.
Manish Chandra, you'll never see platform sandals in my search history, but I'm glad it's popular for you guys. Thank you so much for your time. Let's go back to our viewer questions, get some more answers. Here's a simple one. Why is my 401k dissolving?
I'll take that.
Yeah.
Because you own some stocks. You own stock index funds. And, it's so weird when I get these questions about retirement because people will say to me, if you're younger, it's not a big deal. But what if I'm 65 and I'm really going to retire in 2 years?
Still doesn't feel like not a big deal to me. I'm far from retirement age.
I get that. But I mean, I think that you have a different perspective. When you know you're going to be retiring within the next few years, it feels really scary. It really does. And I think the mind shift is we want people to really think about retirement, not like just the day you retire. Like, I am retiring on April 15th. Goodbye. I'm done. No, my retirement period will probably last 20 or 30 years. So even if you're on the precipice of needing some of your money, I think that the good news is you can still be a long-term investor. So one of the things that's happened in the last couple of weeks is that we've all gotten this extraordinarily good lesson in risk. Because I guarantee you, the person who wrote that question, or you, on February 19th, would not be saying to me, I'm just so nervous that the market will drop. That was when the S&P 500 made a new all-time high. And what we want people to do is, as my dad was a trader, and one of his favorite sayings was, you have to become a seasoned investor. And I would say, well, Daddy, how do you become a seasoned investor? He goes, well, you see how your mother seasons a piece of meat. She whops it with a mallet. That's how you season, and that's how you become a seasoned investor.
That's tenderizing.
And he said to me, what happens is, as an investor, you have to get whacked over the head. You have to get whacked over the head a few times to learn how far you've gone. Are you taking too much risk? Is this something you cannot stomach going forward? I think it is well worth everybody's time to interrogate how you really felt over the last month. Because if you're honest with yourself, maybe you shouldn't be 100% in the stock index fund. Maybe you should have a little less risk. That's okay. But you can't cry on the way up to say, oh, I wish I were more in stocks, and then cry on the way down because I'm all in stocks.
But there's no way to avoid any kind of loss.
Well, listen.
It's just how much loss are you willing to tolerate?
Put it this way. You could be 100% in a money market account in your 401k. The problem is that won't keep up with inflation over time. And so the whole point of investing is to put a dollar to work so it works harder than the inflation rate. That is what all the game is. You want your money to grow faster than the inflation rate. So the problem with being an investor is it requires this very unnerving condition as a human being, uncertainty. And that you have to take in. You have to be willing to take that ride. When you buy your ticket to be an investor, when you put that money in that 401k, you're on the ride.
Well, are you in the market for a new home? Strap in for that ride. We asked the president and CEO of the National Association of Home Builders how tariffs could drive up the cost of building materials and impact housing affordability. If you're in the market for a new home, how much extra is this going to cost you? We'll have that answer on the other side of this break. You're watching a special edition of the Daily Report.
can see clearly now. Clearly, CBS Mornings.
Weekdays on CBS.
Yeah!
Tony, coming?
No, I'm gonna stick around for an hour.
CBS Mornings Plus with Adriana Diaz and Tony DeCopel, right after CBS Mornings.
It's just like mornings.
Plus fun. Oh, yeah, it's gonna be a bright, sunshiny day.
Politics isn't a game. When do consumers actually get to touch and feel a difference in their lives? Politics is about policy. So you would encourage Democrats to work with Donald Trump on an issue like healthcare. I'm a voracious consumer of information, and I'm impatient. I don't like to be spun. Do you know if there are active terror cells in the United States right now? To be moderator of Face the Nation means bringing the most powerful stakeholders to the table to become better informed.
When you need your sports news all the time,
We've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you.
Big news coming out of the NFL. A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
With highlights.
What a finish at the final round of play.
And in-depth analysis.
Can they three-peat? Tony Romo joins the conversation.
What can you say about this game?
When you need your sports in a snap,
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
find it on CBS Sports HQ. Streaming free anywhere you are.
While America's relaxing policies around social media and the internet, Germany is cracking down on lies and vitriol online.
How do people react when you take their phones from them?
They are shocked. Which approach makes more sense? Plus, Timothy Chalamet only on 60 Minutes.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go, with the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes.
Like a John Grisham novel come to life.
Real lives.
He pointed a gun to me and said, "This is the day you die." And he shot me.
Real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
I'm an innocent man, and I hope the whole world can see it now.
Catch the latest episodes. Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
The all-new CBS Evening News every weeknight.
This is CBS.
Back and forth from the Trump administration on tariff plans. Some home builders and buyers are raising concerns about the long-term impact on the housing industry. According to the National Association of Home Builders, $204 billion worth of goods were used in the construction of new homes in 2024. $14 billion worth of those goods were imported from foreign countries, meaning roughly 7% of all goods used in new home construction last year came from outside the U.S. Earlier, I spoke with Jim Tobin, the president and CEO of the National Association of Home Builders, to get his perspective. Which home building materials are typically imported and from where?
So our largest imports come from three countries primarily: China, Canada, and Mexico, in order of importance in that order. But from China, we're talking about lighting fixtures, some small hand tools and power tools, as well as major appliances. From Canada, primarily, we get a lot of our aluminum as well as our lumber. 30% of the lumber we use in this country is imported, and about 70% of that, almost 80% of that, actually comes from Canada. And then Mexico, some appliances as well, but gypsum primarily, which is the main component in wallboard, or sheetrock, if you will, that makes up the interiors of housing. So those three countries are really responsible for a lot of our building materials here in the United States.
So I'm not familiar with whether lumber is covered under the USMCA, but I am familiar with the fact that tariffs on Chinese imports are now going to be 125% effective immediately. So you mentioned lighting, hand tools from China. You mentioned other imports from Canada and Mexico, which aren't completely unscathed from tariffs. We are also seeing tariffs on imported aluminum and steel. So what does this mean for home builders and for how they are going to deal with those added costs?
Well, at first, we were glad to see the 90-day pause on those broader tariffs, but we did see that increase on Chinese tariffs, and when China being the largest supplier of building materials for us, there is going to be an impact. So we're expecting to see prices rise for those materials that come from China, and even those that may come from other countries that still have that base 10% tariff on it. So we're anticipating higher material prices, which are either going to be absorbed by the builder, or more likely they're going to be passed along to the consumer in the form of higher prices, whether they're buying appliances or in the cost of that home that our members are going to build for them.
What does that mean? Have you crunched the numbers yet on how much home buyers could expect to shell out? How much extra?
We've done some survey work, and by and large, our members are saying it's a little bit north of $9,000 to the cost of a median-priced new home. Of course, that may go down as now the tariffs are a little bit more relaxed, and of course, it may go up depending on how much materials are imported from China. But we are anticipating something, somewhere between $7,500 to $10,000 could be in the cards for new homes in this country.
Roughly 15% of our mortgage-backed securities are owned by foreign countries, according to Government National Mortgage Association, or Ginnie Mae, including China. So if China wanted to retaliate in other ways besides tariffs, they could decide to sell some of that debt, right? I mean, that could cause mortgage rates to rise. Are you concerned about that possibility?
We're watching the bond markets very, very closely. We saw that spike last night, which could foretell mortgage rates north of 7%. We saw that calm down today, of course, after the president's announcement. The bond market continued to react to that. We are very closely aligned with the 10-year Treasury, and especially as we get into the spring buying and building season, rates are going to be incredibly important, not only to home buyers, but builders as well. So we want to make sure that we don't get into a situation where China is selling our debt and we see higher interest rates, because that's going to translate into higher costs as well.
Let's talk lumber really quickly in the 30 seconds I still have you. President Trump signed an executive order calling for a 25% increase in timber production from federal lands. Will that be helpful to your industry?
Enormously helpful. So grateful for the president for wanting to increase our domestic production. Like I said earlier, 30% of our lumber comes from across our borders. If we can bring more of that production to those rural areas in the country, restart those sawmills, and produce more of our lumber here, we will reduce our need for foreign lumber, and that's a good thing in my mind.
Jim Tobin, thank you for your time. We asked our CBS News community journalists across the country to find out what people want to know about tariffs. Lana Zach is in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Karen Hua is in Houston. Ian Lee is in Kansas City. Nicole Valdez is in Nashville, and Katie Weiss is in New Orleans, talking to you folks out there about your questions. And here is some of what they heard.
This is obviously going to be a big shift in our economy, and I'd ask, what should I avoid and what should we be investing in?
They're going to hurt more American people than help. Then what are we going to do about it? What can we tangibly do to improve or put pressure on our leadership to not do them?
What's the advice for people who are not in the immediate range for retiring, but are concerned about stock markets plummeting? Should we invest in, bonds or any other things that you can if you have some liquidity?
I was just wondering if tariffs have always existed or if they have just started happening more now that Trump has introduced more policies.
For the average American, what's the best thing to do with their money, right? 401ks probably don't look like the best idea right now. What is the other option?
Mattress. No, I'm just kidding. All right, what do you guys want to talk about first? What do you want to tackle?
I'm going to let you go first.
I think what was really interesting, just to comment about that, is that everyone was talking about the stock market. And we talk about this all the time. The stock market doesn't mean the economy, right? Because actually the economic data right now is good. We're going to get some more tomorrow with inflation. But, that is part of what is influencing consumer sentiment, which I thought was interesting. The question that stood out with me is just, it's so important with context. Have tariffs always existed? And yes, this has been around for centuries. This is not a new Trump policy. We saw this under the first Trump administration. Biden kept those tariffs on, added new ones. You can go back to different points in history and see this. Countries want to protect their domestic industries, apply economic pressure. It's not new. I just don't think we've seen it done this big.
Right, exactly. Exactly right. In terms of when you think about investing, I always have this like very simplistic way of thinking about how you build your blocks of your investing. And you start and you say, I cover my big three. I've got my emergency reserve fund. I've got my 6 to 12 months of my living expenses. It's set aside. It's not invested. It's just safe. It's my safety net. I try like so hard to whittle down any high interest debt, credit card debt, an expensive auto loan. Get rid of it. And the third is the gateway to begin investing is to open a retirement account, an IRA, a Roth IRA, use your workplace plan, a 401k, a 403b, and get methodical about that investing. One of the reasons why 401ks work so well is that they automatically pull your money out of your paycheck. So a funny thing happened on Friday. A lot of people got paid, and 10% of their money went into the stock market on Friday, a terrible day for markets. If you had gotten that money and then had to make the proactive decision, I'm going to now invest, you would have panicked. There would have been no way you would do that. So automate as much as you can. Be clear that the longer your time horizon, the more risk you could take. And you don't have to be a hero. You don't have to have all of your money make tons of money. If you are uncomfortable with risk, the antidote to that is to save more.
My EP Sandra is going to kill me, but I want to follow up on that. So emergency reserve, 6 to 12 months, high interest credit card debt. Is it in that order? Because somebody did ask me the other day, should I be trying to pay off my debt right now, or should I be just focusing on building up those safety reserves right now?
I have to be honest. When I used to be a financial planner, I'm a CFP, and I did that for a while. And when we would always say, pay down your high interest debt first. Do that, do that, do that. But then I went through the pandemic. And then I realized people really do need a safety net. So the answer is, which is more important? I say yes, do both. So if you have $10, $5 goes into emergency reserve, $5 goes to pay down debt.
Okay, thank you both. What will President Trump's tariff policies mean for the future of the U.S. economy? Well, 2 economic experts who have served in the White House offer their analysis. You're watching a special edition of the Daily Report.
Here comes a big one. What I've seen, it's like chaos.
This is the pager that Hezbollah was using.
How is this possible?
Oh, come on.
Come on.
Whoa.
Wow.
Ask me the hard-hitting questions. I'm open to all of it.
60 minutes. Is this what you want?
60 minutes.
60 minutes!
It's time for the CBS News original, 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
When you need your sports news all the time,
we've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you.
Big news coming out of the NFL. A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
With highlights.
What a finish at the final round of play.
And in-depth analysis.
Can they three-peat? Tony Romo joins the conversation.
What can you say about this game?
When you need your sports in a snap,
we're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
Find it on CBS Sports HQ. Streaming free anywhere you are.
Go to the ends of the earth.
We'll hit the heights.
A great adventure together.
And reach for the stars.
Star power. I like it.
So cool.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking.
Something that's undeniable.
With mindfulness.
Innovative.
Magical. It's like being a child.
And truly original reporting.
God, you do your research.
I tell a good story. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
No matter how you start your day, one thing is clear.
Actually, 2 things. Pretty sure it's 3.
Guys, whether it's news, money, health, or wellness, sports, movies, or even inspiration.
Clearly, CBS Mornings is the place to be. That's like 7 things.
Okay, clearly, I'm bad at math. Always been.
Clearly.
Okay. Clearly, CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7 on CBS.
What happens when you get conversation over conflict?
Anyone that doesn't agree women should be in the submarine force has to ask themselves why they would think about that.
I think they've taught me to have grace and compassion.
When we follow the human side of the headline.
Life is a little bit different now.
It's going to take a while to get used to. And I say it to myself that I can't make this about me.
when we put people before politics.
What would happen if it was harder for Mexican residents to come over to work in Presidio?
I think we'd be in serious trouble.
Are you okay, ma'am?
What happens when you experience the story?
I'm shocked at how devastated this neighborhood is. How bad is it in your house?
Look at it.
When news takes you where the story happens.
We've just crossed into Lebanon.
Here in Chicago.
Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania.
When the world's best journalists come together to cover your world, you get the all-new CBS Evening News every weeknight.
Reporting President Trump walked back his reciprocal tariffs Wednesday, announcing that higher levies on most nations will be put on pause for 90 days. The one exception is China. President Trump says he's increased those tariffs to 125%. For more, let's bring in Jean Sperling. Jean is the former director of the National Economic Council and assistant to the president for economic policy under former presidents Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, and a senior advisor to former President Biden. He's also the only person to serve as a national economic advisor under two presidents. Thank you so much for being here, Jean.
Thank you.
What is your reaction to everything that happened Wednesday?
Well, I think that for a while, really the whole world was hoping that the Trump administration, President Trump, would recognize the damage that was happening in the stock market and the ultimate potential for increased damage to the economy. And you'd seen no reaction whatsoever. And so markets very much welcomed this 90-day pause. But I think that there is perhaps a little bit of over-optimism at what all this means. It is certainly, I think everybody agreed that the type of numbers they were putting on for countries like Vietnam, 46%, made no sense, didn't really have an economic rationale. And so pulling back and being able to negotiate was somewhat comforting news. But you have to remember that you still have the administration committing to 10% globally across the board, and now an unheard of 125% on China. By most estimates, that would still hurt our GDP by as much as a percentage or more of growth, and would cost the average family, $2,000-3,000 in extra costs. So I think it was a welcome reversal. It gives some hope, but I'll be honest in saying that, seeing the S&P come back nearly 10% felt a little bit to me like wishing away the degree of potential danger to the economy that still exists and to families, and the degree of uncertainty that is still out there for small businesses and larger businesses who still have to figure out, do they invest more, do they hire more, do they travel more, all in this period of significant uncertainty.
And Jean, I want to play something that the president said in the Oval Office Wednesday.
I blame the people sitting behind in this chair, behind this desk. This should have been done years ago. This should have been done before Obama, in all fairness. Not only Biden, Obama.
What's your response?
Well, I believe my view, and I think it was President Biden's view as well, is that, we do need to have a manufacturing revival. We do need to make sure trade is working for typical families. And I think we have seen in the past where globalization, whether it's due to technology or trade, had really devastated communities, and that we did need to make sure that when we do trade, that we are protecting our workers and protecting our communities. But there's a smart way to do that by strategically using tariffs, by giving greater incentives, as the Biden administration did, to semiconductors being made here, to electric batteries being made here. And then there's ways you can do it that are just going to be extremely harmful. They're not well thought through. I mean, there were really no Democrat or Republican people who were not associated with Donald Trump who thought the way they were pursuing this was sound and rational. And I will still say that right now, a lot of people estimate that even with this pause, that significant damage has been done to the economy, and that instead of being in a soft landing with 2.8% growth with inflation coming down. We are now at serious risk of having an actual downturn in the second quarter.
All
So
right.
yes, fight for manufacturing, fight for American workers. Don't allow trade that's going to allow us to be taken advantage of. But for God's sakes, don't raise prices on typical families. Don't make them pay $2,000 more.
Okay.
Don't risk the soft landing that the president inherited.
Gene Sperling, thank you so much for your time. Joining us right now is Vance Ginn. He has served as chief economist for the White House's Office of Management and Budget during President Trump's first term and is currently president of Ginn Economic Consulting. Vance, thank you so much for your time. You're a big proponent of free trade. What is your take on what we're seeing right now?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. And what I've seen is a lot of uncertainty. One day tariffs are on, one day they're off. One day we've got massive tariffs on every country, and then they're paused for 90 days. So what I've seen is a lot of economic uncertainty. When I'm talking to businesses, whether they be in Texas where I'm at or across the country, they don't really know how to plan. And one of the things you want to do is look into the future and see what your expected profitability is going to be. And when you have this rising cost from tariffs and other things, it really leads them to not want to act and not really want to have much economic activity. So even with this pause, there's still a 10% tariff on all other countries and 125% on China. This is a massive increase from the less than 2% average tariff that we had before today.
Vance, I want to bring up something that Jill was talking about at the beginning of the program. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt tried to downplay fears that tariffs would push countries closer to China. Let's go ahead and listen.
You tried to say that the rest of the world would be moved closer to China when in fact we've seen the opposite effect. The entire world is calling the United States of America, not China, because they need our markets, they need our consumers, and they need this president in the Oval Office to talk to them.
Do you agree, or is there still a concern that this might drive some of our allies or even foes closer to China?
I think there still is that fear. There could be that situation. I know they said maybe 70 to 75 countries called the White House, but that means that there's another 120 countries that didn't. There's about 200 countries across the globe. And so that means many others could go to China and other places if we're putting a higher tax on Americans. And that's what tariffs are. I think we need to make sure that we understand that it's a tax on Americans when we import goods and services from other countries. And even if it's on China, look, what I've been saying is that we should be making the Trump tax cuts permanent. That should be the focus point right now because they expire at the end of this year. Cutting government spending and deregulating, that will put us in a much better situation to compete with any place across the globe and allow for more economic growth and prosperity instead of raising taxes on Americans.
All right, Vance Ginn, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Hard to believe we're nearing the end of our special hour. We're going to have final thoughts from Jill and Kelly after the break. You're watching a special edition of the Daily Report.
What happens when the world's best journalists come together?
This was an entire building. It will take years to rebuild.
We're from CBS News, American television.
You get the all-new CBS Evening News every weeknight.
This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
No matter how you start your day, one thing is clear.
CBS Mornings is the best way to start your day.
I can see clearly now.
My morning routine.
The first thing I do when I wake up is turn off the alarm.
I try to remember where I put my phone down.
One alarm goes off at 4 a.m.
I need not 1, not 2, but...
And I'm out the door at 4:15.
3 snoozes to get out of bed fully coherent.
How much detail are you looking for?
I love a bath full of bubbles. The more bubbles, the better.
I'm very quick with the actual coffee, shave, shower, dressed out the door, but all around that is just pure chaos. For example, this morning, these are dirty socks.
You want my honest answer? Am I a morning person I gotta be honest, I wish morning started at like 10 a.m.
Can I say that? Clearly.
It's a bright, bright, bright way to start your day. CBS Mornings weekdays at 7 on CBS.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
What happens when we follow the human side of the headline?
I was in tears.
Life is a little bit different now.
It's going to take a while to get used to. And I said to myself that I can't make this about me.
You get the all-new CBS Evening News.
We want to squeeze in one more question from a viewer at home. Can you tell us any good news that has happened due to the implemented tariffs? For example, are there any companies that have publicly declared to transfer their manufacturing to the U.S. to create more jobs? Kelly, that's to you.
Yeah, we have. Absolutely. We have seen Apple. We have seen some of the car companies. We have seen Taiwan Semiconductor. It is happening. And by the way, it would have been great during COVID to have a domestic supply chain. That is a real benefit. I think my reaction, though, is with today, am I incentivized as a business to bring my production here if I can instead go to Vietnam and just do something for 10% instead of 125?
Jill, final thoughts.
You know, it was a historic week. It really was. We don't go through weeks like this in my tenure watching markets and the economy. And I think it would be good to take a deep breath, let things settle. And, you know, we're going to learn a little bit more going forward. But I think for most of us and everyone watching, just kind of try to keep yourself in check. Don't make any brash moves. And remember that most of this is going to develop over many days, weeks, months, and years. And we will not know the end of the story yet. We are just in the beginning.
Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, look, the volatility that is likely going to continue, the uncertainty, but I like that. Let's all take a breath. We're okay right now.
You've had like 1,000 milligrams of caffeine and you're telling us to take a breath.
You're not seeing how fast my foot is moving.
Practice a little more. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. We couldn't get to all of them tonight, so to get more answers to your questions, visit cbsnews.com. It will be pinned to the top of our Money Watch page. Thank you so much.
CBS Mornings is clearly fun.
Money saving. Dollar Jill's here to tell us what it means for you.
Clearly delish.
So what's on the menu today?
Clearly, CBS Mornings weekdays at 7 on CBS.
What happens when the world's best journalists come together?
Write a prescription for the healing of America.
We're retired